Violence is a language in the UFC. Sometimes it's spoken softly, a clean jab, a technical sweep, a patient submission. And sometimes it's screamed at full volume. Tonight, we're diving deep into the fights that pushed human limits, the wars that left fighters scarred, commentators speechless, and fans wondering how two human beings walked out of that cage alive. This is not just a countdown. It's a journey through the most brutal, punishing, unforgettable fights in UFC history, the ones where heart mattered more than blood, and survival mattered more than winning. With that in mind, let's start with a modern classic, one of the most iconic and undeniably brutal fights ever witnessed. Zhang Weili versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk at UFC 248. This wasn't just a fight, it was an explosion. From the very first second, these two elite strawweights abandoned the idea of pacing themselves. They tore into each other with the intensity of a championship finale. Except, they kept that pace for 25 straight minutes. Joanna's forehead began to swell so dramatically, it became one of the most shocking injuries in UFC history. Weili fired crisp combinations, powerful kicks, and counters that echoed through the arena. Joanna answered with elbows, blitz attacks, and endless pressure. By round 5, both women were covered in sweat, bruises, and exhaustion. Neither backward step, neither resignation. Just two warriors locked in a fight that redefined what brutality looks like at the highest level of MMA. Many fans and analysts still call it the greatest women's fight of all time, and easily one of the most brutal displays of willpower ever seen. But brutality doesn't only live in speed and chaos. Sometimes it's born from a long, grueling battle that tests both technique and survival. And that brings us to another legendary war, Jon Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson at UFC 165, a fight that even today is spoken about with reverence. This wasn't just a title fight, it was a violent collision of styles, pressure, and unexpected dominance. Gustafsson, the challenger, came out fast, his boxing sharp, his footwork smooth, his takedown defense perfect. For the first time in years, Jon Jones looked human, and that's where the brutality came in. Instead of collapsing under the pressure, Jones fought back with spinning elbows, knees, and long-range strikes that carved damage into Gustafsson's face. Gustafsson kept firing, Jones kept returning, blood spilled, legs wobbled. Both fighters reached levels of exhaustion that would break any normal human being, but they kept going. Round after round, the violence escalated until the final buzzer, when the audience rose to their feet knowing they had just witnessed a brutal masterpiece, a war that left both men forever changed. But if we're talking pure savagery, physical destruction combined with emotional weight, nothing quite compares to Robbie Lawler versus Rory MacDonald 2 at UFC 189. This is the fight that defines brutality in the UFC. No explanations needed. All you need is one image. Robbie Lawler standing in front of Rory MacDonald at the end of round 4, his lip torn open, blood pouring down his face, eyes filled with something beyond anger, something primal. Rory stood across from him, equally broken, nose shattered, barely holding himself up, and both men smiled. Then they charged into round 5. The fight was a massacre, a technical, emotional, savage war where every punch could have ended the night. Finally, a single shot from Lawler shattered Rory's resistance. He collapsed, not from fear, but from exhaustion and pain. It wasn't just a knockout, it was the moment the human body finally said, "That's enough." Rory himself admitted he went to a dark place he never wants to return to. Brutality in its purest form. But the UFC's brutality isn't only in brawls. Sometimes it's in dominance, in control, in suffocation. And the modern era has given us a new kind of brutality, one defined not by bloody exchanges, but by technical destruction. A perfect example? The 2025 showdown between Islam Makhachev and Jack Della Maddalena. This wasn't a wild back-and-forth war. It was a slow, crushing dismantling. Makhachev, already one of the greatest grapplers in the sport, took Della Maddalena down early and never let him breathe again. For almost 5 full rounds, he imposed a level of control that bordered on cruel. Jack couldn't stand. He couldn't stand. He couldn't escape. Makhachev smothered him, pressured him, drained him, and delivered short, grinding strikes that accumulated into heavy damage. By the championship rounds, Della Maddalena's energy was gone. His face told the story: frustration, suffering, and realization that he was trapped under a master. Makhachev didn't need chaos. He didn't need blood. He redefined brutality into something colder, something systematic.
Now, let's rewind back to an earlier era, a time when the UFC was raw, unfiltered, and still discovering its identity. One of the most brutal fights of that time came from the unforgettable war between Shogun Rua and Dan Henderson at UFC 139. This was not a technical masterpiece. It was a slugfest, a violent hurricane, a fight where both men dug so deep into themselves that it almost didn't seem real. Henderson dropped Hua early, hammering him with bombs that would have ended anyone else's night. But Hua refused to break. Instead, he launched his own assault, pounding Henderson with strikes that echoed through the arena. The momentum swung back and forth so many times that fans could hardly breathe. By round 5, both men looked like they had walked through fire, swollen, exhausted, dragging their limbs. Brutal? Absolutely. Unforgettable? Without question. But brutality doesn't always need 5 rounds. Sometimes it's a flash, a moment of explosive violence so sudden and devastating that it stops the world. That moment came with Francis Ngannou's knockout of Alistair Overeem. 1 uppercut, 1 second. One brutal reminder that heavyweight power is not something to play with. The punch lifted Overeem off the ground, a terrifying display of raw force that instantly cemented Ngannou as one of the most dangerous men to ever step into a cage. Yes, the fight was short, but brutality isn't measured in time. It's measured in impact. And that punch had impact like almost nothing before it. Another unforgettable entry into UFC violence is Justin Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson. The fight was supposed to be a typical Tony Ferguson war: chaos, elbows, blood. But instead, it turned into one of the most brutal beatdowns ever delivered in a UFC main event. Gaethje fought like a man possessed, precise, violent, controlled. Every punch snapped Tony's head back. Every combination chipped away at a career built on toughness. Tony refused to fall, because that's who he is, but the accumulation of punishment became almost difficult to watch. When the referee finally stopped it, Tony's face told the entire story. Damage, heart, suffering. It was brutal. It was emotional. It was the end of an era. Khabib versus Conor, the night the Octagon erupted. If there's one fight that transcended sports and became a global cultural moment, it was Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor at UFC 229. This wasn't just a championship bout. It was pure, volatile bad blood waiting to explode. For months leading up to the fight, the tension was nuclear. Conor's trash talk went further than anyone expected, attacking Khabib's religion, his family, his home country. Khabib, the quiet and disciplined Dagestani warrior, absorbed everything in silence, letting the world see only a cold, unbreakable stare. Everyone watching knew one thing: when that cage door locked, the storm was coming. And when the bell rang, Khabib unleashed it. He mauled Conor from the opening seconds, dragging him to the ground and suffocating him with pressure that seemed almost inhuman. Every punch, every transition, every moment on the mat felt like Khabib was settling a personal score. Conor tried to get back into the fight, but Khabib was a machine, relentless, emotionless, unstoppable. Then came round 4. Khabib wrapped Conor's neck in a tight neck crank and forced the tap. But the brutality didn't stop there. Overwhelmed by months of disrespect, Khabib leapt over the cage and attacked Conor's team, igniting one of the most unforgettable brawls in UFC history. Fans were stunned. Commentators were speechless. Dana White looked like he was watching his organization burn down in real time. Love it or hate it, this wasn't just a fight. It was a cultural earthquake, the most chaotic, emotional, and explosive moment the UFC had ever seen. So what do all these fights have in common? Beyond the violence, beyond the spectacle, they each reveal something essential about the UFC. This sport is built on human limits. Not just physical limits, but mental, emotional, and spiritual ones. Brutal fights are the ones that strip everything away and leave only 2 things standing: skill and will. The fighters who survive these wars, win or lose, become part of UFC history forever. As the sport evolves, so does brutality. We've moved from wild, reckless brawls to more technical, strategic fights, but the core remains the same. Whether it's Lawler and McDonald bleeding on the canvas, Weili and Joanna trading bombs, or Makhachev suffocating opponents with surgical precision, brutality is not just about destruction. It's about endurance. It's about refusing to quit. It's about pushing past everything that should make you stop.